Humanity is getting stupider. I don't think most people would disagree with that, but just in case, we're gonna provide a little bit of evidence for that to, I guess, probably agree with your gut feeling. I imagine most people feel like, yeah, you look out there and people don't seem as curious. They don't seem as capable of critical thought. They in school aren't performing as well. And maybe this is kind of a problem for our species. Maybe it's something that we should actually talk about. Now, I know there will be some knee-jerk explanations to try to explain away this and be like, well, it's the vaccine did it. It's those damn Bill Gates nanobots that have been ruining our brains or whatever, but that's not actually true. The trend that we're gonna describe, the actual statistical evidence that people are less intelligent than they were, this has been going on since the early 2010s. And let's jump into some of the evidence compiled in this case by Futurism. So they say that though there's been a demonstrably steep decline in cognitive skills since COVID-19 pandemic due to the educational disruption it presented, the trends have been in evidence since at least the mid 2010s, suggesting that whatever is going on runs much deeper and has lasted far longer than the pandemic. So, okay, so if it's not just that, then what is it? Well, in 2022, the National Endowment for the Arts found that just 37.6% of Americans said that they'd read a novel or short story in the year prior, a share down from 41.5% just 5 years earlier, and 45.2% 5 years before that. So in a 10-year period, it went from 45.2% down to 37%, which is a significant chunk of all of them in just one decade. Okay, so there's a little bit less leisure reading, that sort of thing that we know is supposed to enrich you and help your mind and all that. We know that. Let's jump into more explanations. According to the 2023 results from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, this is the same international consortium that puts out the PISA survey. 34% of adults in the US scored at the lowest levels of numeracy, which essentially means that they lack the ability to work with numbers. A year prior, that share was just 29%. So that to me is the scariest thing. I'm not saying I'm good with numbers, I'm not. But a number like that jumping up 5 points in a single year is concerning. Now, maybe that's the educational disruption. That's where we learn about numbers really. Most people in their day-to-day lives don't do a lot of practice with numbers, but that's not great. And a lot of people think that it's gotta be something to do with technology. People are spending more and more times on devices, and they are technically reading during some of that, but it's not the same sort of reading. The technology is doing the numbers for them. Like maybe that's it, I don't know. I don't have a lot of answers here, Sharon, but I definitely think that a lot of people are noticing what seems to be a trend with many different facets, all pointing towards people seem less cognitively put together these days. What do you think?
I think that's accurate. I would look for the reason why. Some of it is real, in my opinion, based on the fact that we're using more chat, more iPhones, more just relying on things other than what we see in front of us. I'd say maybe a third is due to disinformation, that deliberate spreading of lies. And finally, the rest is a trauma response, I think. I give up. People are just saying, I give up. They don't even want to engage in some of this reasoned thinking. They want to just exist because it's too painful and they've got trauma. Now, honestly, I probably should go get the degree because I think I'd be good as an analyst on this kind of thing. I actually think that that's what's happening.
I don't know. Look, I'm concerned about a lot of this. I mean, I've talked frequently on the show about sort of like the death of reading, particularly among men. Women still read at higher rates. I mean, I think they could get their numbers up too, but men in particular, and particularly younger boys, basically don't read at all. And I don't think that reading is the only way that you enrich your mind or whatever. And I know that I'm biased because I write. And by the way, if you want to get up that number on reading novels and short stories, I do put them out on my Patreon. Look into it. But anyway, so I think that that's a major problem. But also in terms of like the critical thought, I saw this study that looked into how people evaluate like whether claims that they hear are accurate. And it terrified me at the point that I read it. It basically said that a lot of people get their news from videos like this, for instance. And so sometimes they're about science, sometimes they're about politics or whatever, sometimes they're about news. They make factual claims. And they found that especially for the younger people, they weren't really paying that much attention to the claims being made or the evidence being presented. They just kind of went immediately to the comments to see if people agreed with it. So if there was a lot of agreement with the claims, then they assumed the claims were true. If there was a lot of agreement that the claims were false, they would agree with that. And if there was a lot of disagreement that they didn't know what to think. But that's not really what like critical thought is. That's a part of it. I mean, if you make a claim and in the comments, people are like, well, actually, you should consider this, then integrating that I think is important. We have examples of that even on today's show where people were like, hey, well, bear in mind X or whatever. But like to just crowdsource truth, I don't think that makes a lot of sense, especially because of how easy it is to manipulate. I mean, if you're just trusting whatever the names in the chat say, you don't know that those are being honest. You don't know that those are even people. It's super easy, even pre-AI, to fake a lot of that activity. You could do that on Twitter, like easy peasy. And so, I'm really worried about people's ability to work with numbers, their ability to work with language, but especially their ability to determine what is true, what is false. You have the rise of the people who say they do their own research, and when you look into it, it's like, I don't know how you're calling that research. It's basically, again, the process I just described. And I don't know what the solution to this is, particularly in a time when people don't trust teachers. They don't trust the sort of scientists that would do these sorts of studies. They don't trust the media that would report on these sorts of studies. And so it seems like, I don't know, like a self-fulfilling thing or like a process that's making itself worse as it goes. Again, I don't have a solution, but I feel like an acknowledgement of the problem has to come before whatever that solution eventually is. What do you think?
I think you're right. Let's acknowledge that this is happening. Now, that's going to be the biggest hurdle yet, because we're at a point in society where we're not willing to acknowledge things that are painfully obvious. So good luck with that before we can figure out what do we do next, and how do we get people reading again and following your suggestions and doing more book clubs and willing to engage in a real way, in a curious way, not just coming with talking points, because we do that in our everyday lives too.
Yeah, I don't know. I know. Again, if you want to test it out with some original writing, I can provide that, but I am worried about this. I'm gonna just respond to one comment because again, we sometimes have disagreement in the chat. Galfar says the ability to determine what is true and false is not intelligence, though, John. It's wisdom, which I don't know if that's exactly how I define wisdom, but I agree with you. There's multiple aspects of this. The issue is that I don't just think raw intelligence is the issue. I think it's intelligence more broadly, the ability to think. The desire to think, the capacity to think, all of that I think is a part of this. It's not just one thing. It's curiosity, it's intelligence, it's wisdom, it's all of those things. And I think that we need to talk about it. Members make a difference here at TYT. You help make the show happen, and we see you in the chat with your loyalty badge. Click the join button to become a member today.